Hello everybody. Thanks very much for the invitation. First of all, I want to say that I'm very impressed with all your projects because I come from a country where we actually don't really talk about participation. And I guess the reason for that is that we have these institutions that are around for such a long time, and everybody knows how they work, and we've already got this participation. But I think it's very interesting and very important that you have those projects you have, and I really enjoyed this conference a lot. So I'm going to talk about political participation at popular votes in Switzerland. Okay, this is the structure of my presentation. I will start with participation at the local level, since that's actually kind of the topic of this conference. There's not much evidence in Switzerland, there's not much empirical work done on the local level, so I can only say some things about that, and then I will pretty soon go to the national level and talk about the direct democratic participation in Switzerland on the national level. So if we talk about participation in Switzerland, we very fast get to the question of why is participation actually so low in Switzerland? Which are the factors that influence this participation? And in the end, I will shortly talk about the challenges of direct democracy. Okay, so participation at the local level. In the Swiss municipalities, we have actually two options. Yes, it's all here, great. One option is citizen assemblies. In about 80% of all Swiss municipalities, people can actually go to the town hall and decide on all local matters. They get together and they talk about it, but mainly the projects have already been prepared by the government, by the local government. So they can still talk about it and they can still bring in their ideas and try to change things, but it's not, they don't get in there, they can't bring their ideas in at the beginning, but at a rather late stage. But at least they can decide on all local matters. These citizen assemblies take place at least once a year, more like twice a year, and the important thing is, I think, that people vote by the show of hands, so everybody knows what everybody voted. So in small municipalities, that's of course a little bit of a problem, because there's like social control if everybody knows what you voted on. In the other, about 20% of the municipalities, there are parliaments. That's mostly in the bigger municipalities and in the cities. So they just work like everywhere else. Okay, then I have some non-systematic evidence from the local level about these citizen assemblies. Participation is, let me check, yes. The participation is usually quite low. In the smallest municipalities, again, the ones where the social control is the strongest, there we have about 25% of people participating, but in the bigger municipalities, there are only about 3 or 4%, so it's really low. And these people can decide on all the matters that the local level actually can decide upon. And it's not only low, it actually has been decreasing over time. And that's, of course, a problem and has led to the fact that many municipalities gave up this form of citizen assemblies and changed it to parliaments. Representation, yes, there's always an overrepresentation in these citizen assemblies of all the voters, long-time residents, and men. All the voters, long-time residents, isn't that much of a problem because you have the same overrepresentation also in other forms of participation in Switzerland, but the gender gap has actually closed for elections and popular votes, but obviously not for these citizen assemblies. On the other hand, you don't have a gap in education or income, so that doesn't matter in citizen assemblies, but it does in the participation at election or popular votes. There's also some aspects of the quality of democracy to be considered, where there's these citizen assemblies, there are higher levels of political interest, of political confidence, and of satisfaction with democracy. So this possibility to get your ideas in and make the final decision actually has an impact on those factors as well. Okay, so we get to the part everybody always asks me about, the Swiss semi-direct democratic system. First of all, it's semi-direct because the citizens don't decide on everything. They have the possibility to decide upon anything they want, but they don't always decide. If they don't veto, sometimes the parliament can make laws as well. Okay, popular votes take place up to 4 times a year. There's not only the popular votes on the national level, there's also some on the cantonal level, also elections on the cantonal and the communal level. So there's actually a whole lot deciding these 4 times a year. The instruments, here the important part is that people have more possibilities for input when there's more at stake, when there's a higher level. So with the constitution, for every change of the constitution at the national level, and actually at the cantonal level and the communal level as well, every change has to be put up to a vote. So whenever the parliament changes the constitution, there's a mandatory referendum and people have to decide whether they want this change or not. The popular initiative is also a way of changing the constitution. Citizens can collect 100,000 signatures, and with those signatures put up any issue they want for popular vote. So the whole country actually then decides upon their issue. The facultative referendum takes place, or let me start otherwise. Whenever the Parliament changes any law, then there's the possibility for the people to collect 50,000 signatures, and with those signatures, they put up the law that the Parliament decided on for a vote. So if they don't take this possibility, the law just passes, otherwise there's a popular vote on it. Okay, now I think this is probably the most important part of my presentation, namely the influence of those direct democratic instruments on the political system, because there's a very strong influence on the system. First of all, there's a pressure to include minorities. As I've said before, with the facultative referendum, which is a very strong instrument for the public, you always have to take as many voices into account as you can, because if you only have one organization who can collect 50,000 signatures, then there's a vote upon it. And in the facultative referenda, the chance or the probability of the government or the parliament winning is at about 55%. So in almost half of all popular votes concerning the laws created by the parliament actually loses, and then they have to start all over again. So they created, a long time ago actually, a procedure to get as many people or as many, especially influential organizations on their side, bringing in their ideas so that this won't happen and so that they won't have to start all over again. Another effect of this system is that there's a coalition government in Switzerland, because if you have strong parties that still represent the minority but are strong and are not in the government, then the chance that they use this facultative referendum all the time and actually attack all the laws that you pass is pretty strong. So that's why in Switzerland there are like most or almost all big parties in the government, so that shouldn't happen as often as it would otherwise. due to this fact that you have this stable composition of the government, everybody's inside and that doesn't really change, that kind of takes away the importance of the elections, because the parliamentary, the way the parliament is set up and the government as well, they don't really change much, and then what are elections actually for? So there's a low importance, and not only because of that, but to some level because of that, the participation in elections is very low. In 1995, it was at 48%, so that's not really that high. So maybe now the question arises, is it different in direct democratic votes? Because, I mean, I just showed how important they are, and the truth is, no, it's actually even lower. The mean participation rate at popular votes is at 44%, so even lower than at elections. I don't see this. Oh, you do neither, okay. Well, one reason for, okay, I just go ahead. Okay, let's continue. Why is participation so low? So what we need to consider is that the mean participation is actually very low, but it's not always like that. There's a high variation. There are popular votes like the one in November 1992, where the Swiss voted on the accession to the European Economic Area, where the participation was at 78%. So that's kind of high. But then there's also several votes actually where participation is at around 27%, like the one where the arrow is the second one. There was a law about fighting animal disease, and it was really far away from people's everyday life, and it was a very technical proposition, and nobody really cared about, and it was only that one, it wasn't another one, so 27% of the citizens actually decided on that matter. Okay, now to figure out participation at election, or to study it, to analyze it, it doesn't make sense to only look at one popular vote, because which one would you take? One where the participation is low, or one where the participation is high? So what we usually do is we look at several popular votes. And since a few years we have these great data sets where some municipalities or some cantons, here I have data from the city of St. Gallen, they provide us with information about the registry data of who participated at what popular votes. So here we have the information about 15 different popular votes and elections as well. And this allows us, here it is, this allows us to see that there's actually almost 20% of the people who never participate. So in 15 times, they never participated. But then on the other hand, it's a bit slow, we have about 15% who always participated, and with all the other people actually falling somewhere in between. The 50% line is at 8 out of 15 participation or popular votes. So about half of the people participate at about half of all possibilities. So I think this is very important. We have a very low participation at the mean or at every single popular vote, but if you take it together, you actually have 80% of the people who participate whenever they actually think it's important that they do. So what are the determinants of participation? There are actually the same individual level factors that influence participation at elections as well, so I will not go into this because that's just not the important part. What is important are the ballot-specific determinants. So the actual propositions that are put forward are very important for participation at popular votes. We have the content and the topic, which is, quite understandably, if we have a topic everybody cares about, everybody knows about, then people go to the polls without any problem, without much campaign necessary. But if we have very difficult propositions with a low perceived relevance, then the participation is obviously lower. For the instruments, initiatives usually draw a larger crowd than do mandatory or facultative referenda, because they're the ones that are the media concentrate on those initiatives, because they're the new things, the things that people try to get into the system, and that's very good for media attention. We also have to consider the conflict constellation, like the share of government parties behind a proposition. Yeah, okay. So, and one question I always get asked as well is, what about campaigning and finances? What is the influence of those? So, can attendance at popular votes be bought? This is always a problem, because there's almost no information on campaign finances. The parties or the campaign leaders aren't obliged to give this data out, so they usually keep it secret, nobody knows about it. Now there's the possibility of counting the newspaper ads, which is something that Anne Politique Suisse does for 52 newspapers, and that's very helpful because it allows us to see at least the newspaper, the differences, yes, between the newspapers. Yes, so this allows us to see that there is actually a significant relationship between the number of ads and the participation, but only if we consider the main proposals. So there are always sometimes like between 1 and 4 proposals, and of course not all of them get the same amount of campaigning, and if we take the one where the campaigning is highest, then we have this significant relationship. Now, that's actually the question everybody was asking themselves when I was talking about the influence of campaigning on participation. The influence of campaigning on the results of popular votes is, of course, a lot more important for democratic theory, maybe. So this should probably surprise. We have down here the campaign spending from both camps, and up here we have the support for the government position. So if we look at the black line, maybe I can do it, this one here, we see a negative connection between the campaign spending, a negative connection between the campaign spending of the challenger camp and the support for the government position, which is obvious, I mean, that one we get. But on the other hand, if we look at the dashed line, we also have a negative relationship. So that would mean that the more money the government camp spends, the less it helps. And that's actually a pretty important part, because it's a very complex relationship between the success of campaign finances and their height. So we have to take some factors into consideration, and if we don't do that, as we did in the graph before, then we get this kind of crude relationship. So one reason, or one factor that we have to take into account is that campaign managers actually know how things work. I mean, they have been around usually for quite a while, they have done several campaigns, and they know how close the race is. We also have some surveys before the popular vote, so they kind of know. And if the campaign if they're very far behind or very far ahead, they just stop putting in more finances because they can use it for next time or whenever. So that actually kind of counteracts the relationship and makes us not see the relationship as well if we don't consider these factors. There's also the status quo camp usually doesn't put in that much effort if they know that they're going to win or lose anyway. The challengers, the ones that put in new ideas, they usually don't really care if they're going to win or not. They just want to promote their thing, and if they win, it's even better. But the chance of winning an initiative is kind of slim. But they just put in money, just so that everybody gets their idea, that everybody can see what they want to present. And that also counteracts the relationship we've seen before. Then another very important factor are the predispositions. People aren't they know what things are about. Usually we vote upon topics that have been voted on before or have been discussed before or are just very well known. And if that's the case, then there are very strong predispositions. And in that case, a campaign cannot change the predispositions of the people. If they know what they're going to vote, then the campaign doesn't really help much. And interestingly enough, it's especially the campaigns that are strongest, like with European Union integration or foreign vote on rights for foreigners and stuff like that, where the predispositions are actually very strong. And there, the campaigns actually can't really change the positions of the people. What they can do, of course, is mobilize their voters, mobilize their people, and that certainly helps, but it also helps the other side as well, because, yeah, if I see that the other people are putting up so much campaign, and I think, oh, this issue might be important, and go to the polls as well. That's actually also the last point. Campaigns not only help the ones who put in the money, but the opponent usually as well. There are also some factors reinforcing the relationship we've seen, and that's the conflict configuration. If we really want to get this relationship, we also have to take this into account. If the share of voters behind a position is very strong, then the finances usually, on this side, there are usually more finances. So if there are more finances, it doesn't automatically mean that you convinced many people, but maybe the people already had that opinion in the first place. And there's also a different receptiveness to the campaign. Not every individual receives the same message. You also always rather hear what your party says and not what the party of the opponents say. So that doesn't work the same way for everyone. Now, if we don't really see the line here, but if we take all these factors into account, we get a relationship somewhat like this here. So it's slightly positive, but it's not that strong. And all of this actually can be seen in the empirical literature. The literature isn't sure if there's an effect or not. Some papers say there is one, some papers say there isn't. Money certainly helps. No one really knows how much. The point is, you probably can't gain that much support if you put up a whole lot of more money than everybody else. But if the vote is very close, then you actually don't have to. So maybe that can be the tipping point if there's just a close margin between both camps. Okay, that's that one already said. Let's continue. So the challenges of direct democracy. The participation issue was already a big challenge to democracy. Another one is the campaigns, as I already said. Minority rights are another problem, also very prominent problem. In Switzerland, the parliament actually decides upon the validity of a popular initiative. So there are 3 criteria, and the popular initiatives actually only get judged by those 3 criteria. The consistency of form, which isn't relevant, the cohesion of the subject matter, so popular votes shouldn't be about education and at the same time about traffic, I don't know. They should just look at one subject and stay inside of that topic. And of course, the most important one is the observance of mandatory international law, the jus cogens, which has to be taken into consideration. But it's only the mandatory international law. And that's a problem as well, because Switzerland has a lot of international contracts and everything, and an initiative can actually collide with those contracts, and they do once in a while. And then the question arises, so which one do we consider more important? I mean, usually the international contracts that are a problem here have been voted on by the people as well. So which one should be more important? Well, the parliament usually considers an in dubio pro populo rule, so if they're not sure, they just let the people vote on it, and then usually deal with the problem later, because they're the ones who actually have to implement well, you have the constitutional rule, the article in the constitution, but the parliament afterwards has to implement a law to actually do what the constitution tells them to do. So in the end, they're the ones who have to figure out this collision. So there's actually no formal protection for minorities, which is certainly a problem. But as I said, initiatives only change the constitution. The parliament still has some leeway and usually uses it if it's a problematic initiative in their mind. They have to draft the according law, and they do that in sometimes very creative ways. Let's say like that. Okay. There is actually an institutional arrangement. I think this is important. The people who created these instruments actually took this aspect of minority rights into consideration. They made some institutional arrangements, namely to protect the Catholic cantons. The Catholic have been a minority. Protestants were in the majority, and the Catholics live in very rural, small cantons in Switzerland, and now for every institutional change there has to be a majority of cantons as well. So there's actually more power for the little cantons, for the people living in the little cantons compared to the people living in the big cantons. Okay, so conclusion. I'm cutting it a little short here. Direct democratic institutions actually have a strong influence on Swiss political system. It changes actually everything. It's not just the popular vote. You don't just do the popular votes and everything stays the same. The whole system is actually a function of these direct democratic institutions. There are certainly a lot of benefits. I only have a few here. Switzerland has one of the highest political confidence in the world, high political interest, and there's always these frequent discussions about issues. It's not just like EU integration, immigration, it's also in September we had a vote on the pension reform, so that topic was very important. Everybody talked about, everybody was considering his or her personal benefits or losses, but also for everyone else. So I think that's very important. People really talk about those popular votes. They don't just take place. They're like really in the center of media and public attention. There are also some disadvantages. I just mentioned the ones I've mentioned before is there maybe is a tyranny of the majority. If you always have the same groups of people winning and the same groups of people losing, that's a big problem. In Switzerland, in this matter, we've been lucky for a long time because the cleavages didn't, they were very diverse, so they didn't actually let the same people always win or always lose. So that wasn't really a problem, but I think that might be changing. And then are the minority rights, so what do we do with them if they're not guaranteed actually by the Constitution? So that was actually it. Thank you very much for your attention, and yeah.